Hospitality Talks. My name is Sandra Fuentes. I think you already know me. I'm the PR and market manager at Hosco. Many of you already know us, I'm sure, but I just would like to refresh your mind about who we are, what our mission is, and what we're trying to do at Hosco, the organization. So our mission is to make hospitality an exciting journey for everyone in this wonderful industry, from students to professionals, educators, employers, of course. And I'm happy to say that we have a great summer ahead of us. We can already see the industry going back to its normal traction little by little. We are seeing an increment on the job posts that we have on Hosco, on the number of applications, and of course, the faster the vaccination gets to all over the world, the faster the industry will recover. And we are not just eager because we're part of this industry to see it back to what it used to be in 2019, but everyone, I think, that loves to travel, loves to have a good meal at a restaurant, loves to have a good time. It's crazy for the industry to go back to its full normality. We are more than 1.5 million members on the platform. We have more than 7,000 companies who are part of Hosco, and we have more than 400 hospitality schools from around the world who are also part of Hosco. And I don't know if I said good morning, good afternoon, because I know we have people joining from the US, we have people joining from Asia and the Middle East. So wherever you are right now, thank you for joining us. Today with me, I have Andy Whitehead, who will be talking to us about emotional intelligence for hospitality leaders. He is a coach with more than 10 years of experience, an expert in emotional intelligence and team growth. And he has worked with many different organizations, from the NHS to individual leaders, to many different companies. And he will be, of course, diving you and giving you insights about emotional intelligence to become a better leader at your organization, and the importance of EI in everyday life, not only in the workplace. Before we begin and before I leave Andy the room, I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. You will receive the full video a week from now. So if there is something you would like to watch again because you want to take notes, you will receive the video a week from now from us, in the email that you register with. And also we have on the bottom of the screen, you will see a Q&A. Andy won't be answering questions during the webinar, so we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. We will have about 10-15 minutes to answer your questions, and I encourage you to please submit your questions. I'll be closely looking at them and choosing the ones that I think will be of most general interest. And also, before we begin, we want to run a little poll to know your opinion about, give me 1 second, I'll share the poll with you. And okay, here's the question. And we have one poll question right now before we begin. And we have one at the end of the webinar as well. This is not an exam. This is just to know your opinion about the webinar you're about to see. Okay, you should be able to see it now on your screen. I will give you about 30 seconds because you just have to pick an answer. Super easy. So how important do you think emotional intelligence will be for the hospitality industry post-COVID? Tick tock, tick tock. I think this is a very easy question. We don't have anyone saying not at all important or slightly important. We have people actually giving a good answer. Okay, I see numbers still moving. I'll give you 10 more seconds to answer. Okay, and I'm stopping the poll now. Okay, so I'll share the results. I mean, I think it's obvious. I think we all think emotional intelligence is extremely important for the industry. I think it was before, and not only for hospitality, for many industries, for many sectors and businesses. And it will be even more important after all this, when we are back to the new normal or the post new normal, however we want to call it. So I think it will be it's super interesting for you to watch this webinar. So I'll leave the room to Andy, and I'll be back soon to take your questions. Andy? Okay, now we can see you again. I'm leaving the room to you. And guys, enjoy.
Thanks, Sandra. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Just before I kind of jump into the presentation proper, I wanted to talk to you about somebody that was my manager. This is going back over 30 years ago. Sad to say, I've been in work for quite a long time. Hopefully I've picked up a few useful things on the way. And his name was Bert Holden. So he was one of my first supervisors. So this is before the time that people would ever talk about emotional intelligence. And Bert was somebody that he did three things that I'd like to kind of highlight to you. He's somebody that he listened better than any boss that I've ever had or met since. But he would listen to everyone, to every conversation he had with people. He genuinely listened to them. He really understood what people were saying. He was very, very good at listening. The second thing that he did is he empathized with people. And he didn't sympathize, he empathized. And there's an important difference between the two. He really managed to kind of understand and appreciate problems and challenges that other people had and the difficulties that had. He understood how they were feeling about things as well. And the third thing that he did, and he did really well, was although he was really passionate about the work that he did and about achieving the best results that he could, he never let his emotions get in the way of his decision making. He always remained very objective about things. So his approach to problems and challenges was always very objective. So that's somebody that I worked with about 30 years ago, again, before people were talking about emotional intelligence. But he actually had all the emotional intelligence from a leadership point of view, or the most that I've ever met with somebody. And he's one of the most effective leaders that I've ever worked with. And I still talk about him today with people that I coach and with the group sessions that I do. Okay, in terms of today, what I'd like to do is we're going to look at the emotional intelligence model by Daniel Goleman. I don't know what level of understanding participants have in terms of emotional intelligence or what experience you've got. So I'll give a quick overview of the 5 key elements of emotional intelligence, or EQ, or sometimes called EI. And then what we'll do is we'll look at how do we take those 5 elements and apply them to an organization. So thinking about organizations in the hospitality sector or the hospitality industry, how would you start to recognize organizations high in emotional intelligence? And then the third thing we'll do is we'll look at how we pull emotional intelligence together under the leadership styles that Daniel Goleman created. The 3 things or 3 objectives that I kind of set myself when I was asked to do this webinar. What I'd ideally like to get out of it, or I'd like you to get out of it, I'd like to raise awareness of emotional intelligence and the importance of it. What I'd ask you guys to do, if you'd like to, is I'd like you to reflect on your own emotional intelligence. So as we go through the individual elements of emotional intelligence, and particularly the leadership styles, I'd like you to reflect on what you think yours are, or what areas you think you could do with improving them, but also reflect on your own organization. And do you recognize any of the elements that we'll discuss later in your own organization? And the third thing, and again, completely voluntary, it would be great if you would personally commit to try and develop your own emotional intelligence or that of your organization, or both. And I'll leave my email address at the end. I'm always happy to have a conversation with people around the challenges they've got and whether there's any way that I can support. Okay, fantastic. So let's start with why is emotional intelligence. Why is it important for the hospitality industry? Well, there's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight why I think it's important. Firstly, I think it's important for service delivery. So the organizations that you guys work with or work for are very much people focused. It's very much about customers. And I think trying to find that edge or that point of difference, it often comes from those personalized touches that surprise and delight people. And I think it's emotional intelligence skills that will help employees anticipate the needs of guests and customers. So that's how you can really create much better service delivery. And secondly, I think it's important because a high level of emotional intelligence on the part of managers and leaders is really essential for building a strong team that is motivated to give its best. And if you're working with the team where feelings are valued and there's a culture of empathy and understanding, employees are much more likely to feel and perform at their best. And not only does this make for a better guest experience, but I think it really should have a significant and positive impact on employee retention levels and things like absenteeism. So that's important to have better emotional intelligence in the hospitality industry. Okay, let's move on to looking at the EQ model itself that Daniel Goleman created around 1995. So there are 5 key elements to this. So I'm just going to talk through each one and give you a brief overview. And again, if you feel it's useful, you might want to try and recognize whether you feel you have high, medium or low levels of emotional intelligence based on each one of these different elements. So the first one that we'll look at is self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is you'll recognize people that have high levels of self-awareness because they know how they feel. They're in tune with their own feelings and their own emotions, but they also understand the impact of those emotions and those feelings on themselves and on other people. From a leadership perspective, you would also be very good at understanding your own strengths and weaknesses. The flip side to that is where we have managers and leaders that are low in self-awareness, they don't tend to really recognize when they have weaknesses. They might actually probably overdo their strengths somewhat. If you feel that you need to try and improve your self-awareness, just a couple of minor things that you could try. Reflection is very, very important in terms of improving your self-awareness. So I think just maybe spending a few minutes each day or each week, whether that's keeping a journal or actually just thinking about how things have gone and doing some self-reflection will help you build your own self-awareness levels. Another thing that you can do is slow down. Sounds a bit obvious, but when you're somebody that maybe, I don't know, maybe you, if you get angry from time to time or your emotions get the better of you, sometimes if you just slow down, you can then start to actually reflect on those emotions and recognize them, and that can be helpful. Second point in Goleman's model is self-regulation. So now we're moving on to actually, how do you self-regulate as an individual? When we have people that are high in terms of their self-regulation, what we see is managers and leaders or individuals who are pretty calm when they're dealing with different problems and issues. You won't generally see those kind of emotional outbursts. They're not people that are managed by their emotions, they manage their emotions. You'll see that they won't be rushed when it comes to decision making, and they will stay objective. They won't let their emotions get in the way of those effective decisions that they need to make. So this is very much about staying in control. So if you think you're somebody that needs to work on this a little bit, a couple of ideas for you. An important thing to do is to hold yourself accountable. So maybe you're somebody that tends to blame others when some things go wrong. So it's really important to kind of stop that. Try and make that commitment to admit to your own mistakes and kind of face the consequences, whatever they may be. You'll probably sleep better at night, and you'll definitely start to earn more respect from the people around you. Self-regulation. The third thing is motivation. This is very much about how we motivate ourselves. So where does your motivation come from? Now, people that are high in their own kind of personal motivation, They tend to set goals for themselves and challenges, so they're always trying to improve things. So they have that they have a high level of a desire to try and progress and to get better. They will tend to set fairly high standards for themselves, so they're always trying to push the bar higher and higher. And an important thing that you would recognize in somebody that's highly motivated is it will be intrinsic. So it will come from inside them. They're not necessarily doing things because somebody wants them to do it. They're doing it because they want to do it themselves. Now, if you feel that you need to try and improve your own levels of motivation, try a couple of these things. A good starting point is to ask yourself, or re-examine, why do you do the job that you do? What is it that first made you fall in love with the career that you have now? And just maybe re-examine that. It's really important to try and understand what your purpose is, or what your why is. Why do you do what you do? Another thing is any challenges that you face, or particularly if you fail at something or don't do as well as you thought, instead of being negative about it, always try and find at least one positive in any failure or in any challenge that didn't go so well. And that will help you start to improve your own personal motivation. The next is empathy. Or sometimes we call this is about social skills. So I think for leaders and managers, it's really important that you understand your people and the people that you work with, both people who report to you, your peers, and the people above you. If you have high levels of empathy, you'll definitely have a much better kind of team around you, and it's critical for that team success and building a team. You tend to find people high in empathy and high in that kind of social awareness is they can put themselves in other people's situations. They're good at walking in someone else's shoes. They're generally good at developing people, and they will be able to help grow and nurture talent within a team. So empathy is a key skill to try and develop around that. If you're somebody that wants to try and improve that empathy, so maybe if you're somebody that tends to focus on the task and maybe not so much on the people, try walking in other people's shoes. Challenge your own perspective. Sometimes it's too easy when we have our own view and there's no one to challenge it inside our head, but maybe you need to challenge your own perspective. See what other people think. Another good thing to do is try and recognize the feelings in other people. So if you ask somebody to do something that they're not going to be happy about, do you recognize the feelings that they're giving off? And if you do, can you respond to them? Can you kind of talk to them? Which shows that you are trying to develop your empathy. The last in Daniel Goleman's model is social skills. And social skills, really, this is about how do we start to influence people around us. So leaders that are high in social skills can really start to not only understand the emotions and feelings of other people, but they can start to change them and influence them. And what we tend to see is people high in social skills are great communicators. They're not just good at communicating good news, they're actually good at communicating bad news as well. So they'll take ownership of it, but they'll be able to communicate very effectively. And another thing that you would tend to see in people with high social skills is that they are generally better at motivating and inspiring other people. They can get that buy-in. And if you feel that you lack some social skills, or you don't feel that you're as good a communicator as you could be, you could try a couple of things to improve. Two things that I would suggest is, when you do your communications, when you talk to people, try and make sure that it's two-way. So don't just treat communication as giving information to people. How do you start to get feedback from people and have some kind of dialogue with them? And then the second thing, and I talk to people about this all the time, is charisma. Build charisma. A lot of people think that charisma is something that you're born with, when really, if you view it as a skill, you can definitely improve your charisma and become more charismatic with your people. And just doing some simple things like eye contact and smiling, genuinely listening to people, all go a long way to building charisma. Okay, so that's the EQ model that Daniel Goleman devised, the 5 key elements to emotional intelligence. That's on an individual level. So if we want to take a look at that model and raise it up and think about it from an organizational perspective, clearly the organizations working in the hospitality industry they're run by people and they're run for people. So you have customers, but you have employees working with those customers. So it's a very people-focused industry. It's not about manufacturing something. It's all about people. So which really almost sounds too obvious that emotional intelligence is so important, not just at the individual level, but also at the organizational level. So let's take a look at 5 different elements which mirror against the 5 EQ elements that Daniel Goleman created. So I've just kind of like worked some different words around this. So we have organizational awareness, organizational management, having a motivated workforce, customer awareness, and customer skills. And really, what would you see in an organization if it was high in organizational emotional intelligence? And I think this is a useful activity if you want to think about your own organization and try and even in your, scribble down on a piece of paper, what would you score your organization in? Or what areas do you feel that it could improve in? The first element is organizational awareness. Now, if you go to an organization that has high levels of organizational awareness, you would see an organization that understands their values. The people that work in the organization, they understand the values of the organization, and you know that because they actually display the values. So lots of organizations will have a set of values, but it's not often that you will see the people in the organization displaying those values. You'll also, as an organization, you will understand what your capabilities are. You'll understand what your key strengths are as an organization. Just as importantly, you'll understand what your limitations are. The second element is organizational management. Now, when an organization has high levels of organizational management, you will see that they have good levels of control in terms of managing employee behaviors, which are clearly in line with the company culture. And they'll also have effective and well-trained processes and goals, which are set to enhance the whole customer experience. And I think when you actually experience that in an organization, you can see that it has high levels of organizational management. Third element, having a motivated workforce. When you spend time talking to employees in an organization in the hospitality industry, whether it's a hotel or it's a restaurant, you'll quickly recognize that the employees are motivated and they're responsive to customer needs. They'll be eager to please. But they'll also understand and believe in the vision and the purpose of the organization. They actually buy into it. And that's really, really important. They're not just doing it because they're being told to do it. They actually buy into that ethos and that culture. They're motivated intrinsically. The fourth element is customer awareness. Organizations high in customer awareness, they understand they understand what customers want. They understand what customers need. Now that, I guess most organizations would say that they understand that. But if you are from an emotional intelligence point of view, this moves far beyond just the material and moves more into the emotional. So you would, as a customer, you would experience things that you want before you've asked for them. And I think many of us have experienced that in different settings where the experience just goes far beyond our expectations. And it's almost like the staff actually know what you want before you have to ask for it. The culture would be very much a proactive one in terms of customer awareness and less reactive. So it would always be one step ahead. And then the fifth element is around social skills. So social skills or sorry, customer skills in an organization. And you would see that these skills exist because people are actually recruited and with high levels of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is built into the recruitment process. But once you have your employees, you would develop your employees to develop their customer skills, but actually using things like emotional intelligence. And that really is about developing and driving much greater levels of expertise in terms of relationship management. And all of those things you would expect leading to much better customer experience. So customer skills, and that's the fifth element that we have. Okay, so we've looked at the individual set of traits around emotional intelligence, and then we've looked at how that might map across to an organization. So maybe some of you are actually starting to think about, well, what's our organization like? What would it score like? To tie this all together, the last piece of the puzzle from an emotional intelligence point of view is really about leadership. And Daniel Goleman, he devised or he created 6 different leadership styles under emotional intelligence. And what I do is run through these different leadership styles, give you an idea of when they can be effective and when they're maybe not so effective. Hopefully getting you to think about what style you tend to use or what styles you don't use. And because this is how we start to pull together emotional intelligence from an organizational perspective. Okay, so we have 6 different styles. Now I've set these out as in 2 different groups. So we have pace setting and commanding, and then we have visionary, affiliative, democratic, and coaching. Now, the pace setting and commanding styles are dissonant styles. Now, we call them that because they need to be handled with care. These are styles that actually cause disruption and can be quite negative. So when we see leaders that only use those styles, you would expect to see a higher turnover, less teamwork, and definitely a less happy workforce. But then the other styles, they are resonant styles. So what these do is they tend to give off a much more kind of positive energy. So visionary, affiliative, democratic, and coaching. What I'd like to do is go through each one now. I'm just going to tell you when they are effective, when they're not so effective, give you just 1 or 2 pointers in terms of either improving or reducing a style. And then maybe as an activity, if you'd like to try and score yourself, maybe score yourself out of 10 on each one, that might give you some indication of an area that you might want to try and work on in the future. So why not play along? Score yourself out of 10 based on each of the different 6 leadership styles. Okay, the first one is pace setting. Do it my way. So that's a phrase that you might hear from somebody that uses the pace setting style a lot. Their focus is very much on accomplishing tasks, and they want to accomplish those tasks to a high standard. Now, the high standard might be the standard inside their head, but they will be very fixed in terms of what they would like to accomplish. And it is very much about them and the task. It's not about the team. When we use this style, it can be very effective when you're working with a group of people that need little direction. So these are going to be a skilled workforce, highly competent, and it's more about actually just helping them achieve the best results in terms of the task. If you feel that you need to be more pace setting in your style, maybe try a couple of these things. So you can start to actually teach by example. So show people what you want, be very clear about that, but also try and insist on excellence more than maybe you do now. So don't accept mediocrity. Flip side to this is when it's ineffective, the pace setting style is not very good when you need to bring a team together, when you need to empower people, or that's an important aspect. And it's not very good if you really want to develop employees, because it focuses so much on the task. If you need to tone this down a bit, people who are high in the pace setting style tend to try and solve and fix everything. So try and resist solving everything. Another thing you can do is learn to listen to your people a little bit more. Start a two-way dialogue with them. So that's the pace setting style. So give yourself a score out of 10. The next style we have is commanding. Okay, the commanding style is all about do this because I say so. I'm in charge and you must do what I tell you to do. It's about immediate compliance. The boss is right, end of story, there's no discussion about it. This can be very effective when you have a straightforward task to do. And it also can be very effective when you have a crisis. So if there's a fire in the building, this is the style to use. You certainly don't want to be using one of the other styles. This is just about making things happen straight away. If you feel you need to maybe increase your commanding style, think about giving action, being really clear about what you want people to achieve, and be absolutely clear and unequivocal about what you want. Say what you want and expect the results. This is less effective as a style when you have more complex situations and when you have highly skilled staff. It just doesn't lend itself. So when you have a manager that particularly works with commanding and pace setting, because quite often they'll go together, you tend to see it can be very negative from a team working point of view. If you want to reduce this style, try asking for opinions from people, but also ask yourself, why do you feel control is so important to you? And some self-reflection might help you reduce using this style too much. What's your score out of 10 for that? The next style is the first of our resonance styles. So we have visionary. Let's remind ourselves of the big picture. This is all about how you create that vision for the future. It's about inspiring other people with your long-term vision. Now, this can be a very effective style, particularly as an organization goes through a period of change. So as we come out of the pandemic, this might be a style that some people want to try and use more. It can also work particularly well if the leader themselves really believe in the vision, so they have to genuinely buy into it themselves. If you need to improve this style, because if it's something you don't do, try and create and test your own vision. Communicate with your people. Tell them what you want the future to look like. Can you define success and then have a two-way conversation with people about it? It doesn't tend to work so well if the leader's not credible. So if you have a leader that just comes into a role and the team is well established, they maybe have to be a little bit careful because they haven't built up that credibility. But it can also be overplayed slightly, particularly when you do have that tight teamwork and things are going well. And maybe it's not about just creating a new vision for a vision's sake. Maybe it's more about moving things along and then deciding where the team needs to go. In terms of reducing this, I would suggest maybe this isn't something that people would want to reduce so much, but you might just want to make sure you're not overplaying it. People sometimes use the visionary style too much, so everything is about a vision for the future. Maybe ask feedback from people. Ask them if what they think about your style and approach. The visionary style. Okay, the next one is affiliative. People first, tasks second. So this, as it suggests, is all about creating harmony. It's more important that people feel okay than we actually achieve the task. This can work really well if you're dealing with conflict, or if you need to recover trust in a team, if you're trying to build some kind of team cohesion, and it's more important to do that maybe at the start of a project. If this is something that you generally don't do very much, maybe try to identify where things aren't right within your team. So actively identify poor relationships or conflict and see what you can do to resolve them. But also I think it's important to practice empathy. So initiate contact with people, try and get to know them on a different level, and build that kind of that empathy and that understanding of what they're going through. This leadership style tends to be effective, again, in a crisis situation. So when you need to make decisions, it's not about teamwork. If it's used alone, and I've worked with some managers and this is the only style they use. So typically you might go to a meeting and you'll have cakes and biscuits, you'll have teas and coffees, the room temperature will be right, the seats will be comfortable, but there won't be an agenda. But that's okay because everyone's happy. So if you only use this style, you really should look to bring in some other styles as well. A good thing to try and practice is to be a bit more critical in your feedback with people so that you are trying to improve the task delivery, and definitely start to look at some other styles you can bring in. The affiliative style. What's your score out of 10? Democratic. Let's work it out. The democratic style is all about building commitment within the team. It's getting everybody on board, giving everybody an opportunity to air their views. It can be very effective when you need to coordinate things. So when the task is fairly clear, but it's more about how do we achieve it? What's the best way to achieve the results? And you need to seek ideas from people, particularly if you use the visionary style. Then this is a useful one to use afterwards. So you decide the vision, but then you ask people's views on how do we actually achieve it? Increase buy-in. If you want to improve how you use this style, start to involve people in more of the decisions that you make. Start to ask people's views, seek a consensus from everybody. It can be less effective, again, in a crisis. You don't necessarily have time to meet and discuss and have a committee to make the decision. It is also less effective if the individuals in the team are maybe not as competent. So this could be some very new members of staff who are not experienced in the industry or in the job that they're doing. So asking them how to achieve something could be counterproductive. If you need to tone this one down, maybe just resist that kind of democratic approach too much. Actually look at the decisions you make and try and make some on your own. It sounds crazy really, but there are lots of people who only use the democratic leadership style and they struggle to make decisions. And you will see bottlenecks in teams where decisions aren't made when people overuse this style. The democratic style. What's your score out of 10? Okay, the last style is the coaching style. So let me help you develop. This is all about people. It's all about that. How do you help people develop in their careers? It's long-term professional development. Great in terms of helping people move forward and to progress in their jobs and to progress in the organization. Can be very effective particularly when employees recognize gaps in their own development, and they're eager to try and move on. So when people are motivated, so that the individuals in your team, if they're motivated and eager to progress, coaching can be really, really useful. If you need to improve how much of this you do or build this skill, start to think about development goals for people in your team. Do a lot more around encouraging ownership so that people take ownership of different problems and try and formulate their own solutions, but support them and coach them in doing that. It can be less effective in a crisis. Again, this keeps coming up. When there's no time to invest in people, it's all about moving on. This really highlights the importance of making sure that you can use styles like the commanding and pace setting style when you need to. It can also be less effective when when direction and feedback is really important to help the team move forward. So if they don't have the right kind of skill levels, if you tend to use it too much, I would say you don't want to necessarily stop using this. I think it should be more around how you dial down your coaching, but don't stop using it. What I often see, particularly with managers who are not trained in coaching, is they think they're coaching when actually all they're doing is trying to teach people. Coaching is about helping individuals find the solutions themselves. It's not about giving them the answers. Coaching. What's your score out of 10? Okay, so that's the 6 different leadership styles under emotional intelligence. And you may have given yourself some scores out of 10. Hopefully you'll be able to match these against the 6 and highlight areas that maybe you need to do some work on. Maybe you need to bring in 1 or 2 styles into your own repertoire of leadership, just so that you can become a much more effective, well-rounded leader. To finish, I just wanted to highlight a couple of statistics, and there's lots of statistics out there around emotional intelligence. A study that I saw which suggested that emotional intelligence will be one of the top skills from 2020. 81% of competencies that distinguish outstanding managers were related to emotional intelligence. Restaurants, and this was a study with a UK restaurant called Whitbreads. Restaurants with high emotional intelligence, or managers, had higher guest satisfaction, lower turnover, and 34% greater profit growth. And the last point, which I think highlights the gap, I think, in lots of organizations, is only 30% of companies look for emotional intelligence during the hiring process. Thanks for watching the webinar. Zandra, I think you maybe want to come back in now. There's my email address. I'm more than happy for anyone to contact me and have a conversation with me about anything that we've talked about. And Zandra, over to you.
Hi, Andy. Can you make yourself bigger? Now I look like a giant.
Is that okay?
Yes. Your email address is, well, overlapping a little bit, but doesn't matter. I'm sure people will reach out to you for more information and with many questions. Just so you know, guys, on Hosco.com, on the employers part of the website, we have a couple of 3 articles written by Andy about leadership, about emotional intelligence, about its importance, about how to handle and manage 101. So we have very good and interesting articles that can help you in your work life. So we do have some questions, but before we jump into your Q&A, I have another poll for you to answer, and here we go. Let's see. The next one. So let me, poll number 2. I'm gonna launch it now. So you have about 30 seconds to answer. Question is, following this webinar, how likely are you to develop your own emotional intelligence skills? Hopefully we convince you, especially with the stats at the end. Okay, I see still numbers moving. Tick tock, tick tock, 5 more seconds. Numbers are moving. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna end the poll now and share the results with everyone. Taking a picture of this. Okay, so extremely likely. That's a very good result. We have 1 person that said slightly likely, not convinced. So hopefully maybe with the Q&A we can change your mind. 13% likely, and very likely 42%. Okay, and extremely likely 43, so not bad. We have most of the people that attended today's webinar thinking about developing their emotional intelligence. Okay, Andy, I still see some questions submitted in the Q&A, but I already have taken notes of some of them. So let me start. Actually, this is a comment we got through our Twitter account. And it says, well, this user think that people who wrongfully behave, are constantly aggressive and bully everyone have the highest EQ. He says that he strongly recommends not to use EQ at work, but do work with emotion. Emotions are key to develop to develop a convenient climate. What do you think, Andy?
Sorry, say that again, Xandra. So people
he said basically that people who usually bully others at work, people that are more aggressive at work, have the highest EQ. So for me, what he's trying to say is that usually people with high EQ are more manipulative. It seems that they are savvy to manipulate people. What do you think? What's your opinion? I think, well, I'll let you answer this, but it's actually it's a comment. It's not a question. And I wanted to share it because I thought it was interesting.
I guess that when somebody is high, high in terms of their emotional intelligence, they definitely understand the impact of their actions and their behaviors on other people. And it's not enough just to be aware. So they might be high in terms of their awareness, or their self-awareness, but their self-management, I suspect, is low. So they're not actually managing themselves to get the best out of people. If they're allowing themselves to bully people, that for me is not high in emotional intelligence. They might be high in one aspect, so they understand their emotions, but they're happy to use them negatively, would suggest that they're not high in emotional intelligence. Because people high in emotional intelligence would, I think this ties into their values as well. So you would have good and proper values, and you would use them and display them. People who don't, then I would suggest is probably more, they're edging into
to the commanding style.
So in terms of the commanding style, well, if they only use the commanding style, somebody high in emotional intelligence would be better at all styles. Okay. So they would know when they could use things. The commanding style isn't bullying. And I think people mix this up. They think that being commanding is being a bully. If there's a fire in the room or in the building, you're not being a bully by directing people to leave. You're being efficient, and it's the right thing to do. If you have a urgent crisis in the organization, you might use the commanding style. But that's not about bullying people. It's about being clear and directive. Yeah.
Okay. And so basically, but someone with high emotional intelligence will mix the 6 leadership styles from Goleman that you mentioned. Will that balance them out depending on the situation, the employee, and the company culture?
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. So this one came from, if I'm not mistaken, Anka. Can you please explain empathy versus sympathy in the workplace within a team? She says, I understand it's the base of the affiliative leadership style.
Okay, so empathy is understanding what people are feeling, understanding what they're going through, recognizing their feelings. Sympathy is feeling sorry for somebody. So clearly sympathy has its place. And I guess the most obvious, if there's a bereavement, you would sympathize with somebody. But if somebody is struggling with a piece of work, they're struggling to develop a skill, there'll be a number of reasons why they'll be struggling. A mistake a lot of managers make is they assume negative things like the person's lazy or they're not working hard enough. And actually it might be that they're a bit scared, they're maybe not as confident about something. If you empathize, you will understand that, and you can get inside their head to try and understand why they're struggling with a particular skill or a particular project. Then you can to move them forward. If you just sympathize with somebody, all you'll do is feel sorry for them. The key difference to remember with empathy and sympathy is with empathy, you can move people forward. With sympathy, you don't move them forward, you keep them where they are.
Okay, I think that's very clear. So we're saying basically, you know, maybe avoiding the problem, or avoiding these employees has a lack of skill, but you of course understand them and you feel sorry, so you don't say anything, and so that person won't move forward.
Yeah, so if you know, an example would be somebody that's really upset in the workplace because something's happened. I don't know, there's been an incident. You want to try and help them move forward in the incident. So it's trying to remain objective, empathize, but you have to be careful with sympathy, because if you just sympathize with somebody, I'm not, you know, it won't go anywhere. You'll just give them tissues and help them.
Yeah, they will stay where they are. They won't evolve.
Yeah.
Another question, what are some tactics to work under a manager who has low levels of emotional intelligence? So as an employee, how can you deal with a manager like that?
So, okay, so this is about managing upwards. I would think a good place to start is to look at your own emotional intelligence, your own kind of skill levels in terms of particularly those 5 that we talked about, the 5 key elements of emotional intelligence. So that's a good starting point, so that you become more aware of yourself and your boss. If your boss is lacking in emotional intelligence, how do you start to influence them maybe more positively? So it's a little bit trickier because they're your boss. But a good thing to do is how does your boss like to be communicated to or with? So if they like things to be short and snappy, keep them short and snappy. If they like lots of detail, then you maybe have to provide a little bit more detail. Try and find out what are the things that stress them out or worry them, or that make them lose sleep at night, and how do you start to address some of those? So it's difficult if your boss is there and they're not necessarily competent. Mm-hmm. That is a difficult one, because you're not really there to develop them. But I would say, how do you try and improve the situation as much as you can? You might be that you can't improve it ultimately, but you improve yourself, and then you can
navigate the situation better.
Yeah.
Basically, so using emotional intelligence to learn or to read that person, I would say, right? And then try to navigate and to manage the situation.
Yeah, and I don't want to use the word manipulate your boss, but it is about trying to influence them positively. And the better your emotional intelligence is, the better you will be at dealing with some of those things.
Mm-hmm. But that's excellent advice, because at the end is getting to know what can trigger something on them to make them mad, or to make them happy, or at least to keep them neutral, right? And reading what that person, especially at the end, is based on communication and how to express yourself, how to communicate yourself, and how to deliver work. There are some bosses, of course, that like to be up to date and receive information every minute. Some others who are not so micromanagers. So it's actually getting to know your boss, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not about manipulating them, it's about reading them. Okay, next question. Is one leadership style better than the other?
Short answer is no. Clearly the 4 resonant styles definitely are more positive, just in terms of people, but the 2 dissonant styles are needed and necessary. I think that styles like the visionary style and the coaching style, you wouldn't tend to say, if they're the only styles you use, it's not the end of the world. But if you only use the affiliative style, you won't get anything done. Whereas if you only use the commanding style, you'll probably have a higher turnover of staff and a much pace setting style. So there's not one that's better. I would say I would always encourage you to try and understand what's your go-to style. And for some people, that's really easy to pick out. what is it? And ask yourself, do I use any of the other styles? And if you use one or two of them in small amounts, how do you increase that? And how do you increase the use of the others? So short answer, no. Long answer is you really need to develop using all of the styles.
It's a balance, right?
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes, and we have many questions in the Q&A. I was just going through them. One is, and actually we got a couple of same questions. It's about testing. How do you test emotional intelligence at work? Would you advise that to organization when they're in their hiring process? And another one is more a comment saying anyone who is at the managerial level, director level, should pass an emotional intelligence test. But that's an opinion. I don't know if you share it or not, and if you think it's important to test your employees and through the organization.
I think that, I mean, there are a lot, there are different tests out there for emotional intelligence, and I think I would say that if an organization wants to test, they should make sure they go through a proper accredited testing organization, maybe through Daniel Goleman's organization. I'm not affiliated with any of that, so but there are lots of very weak tests that people can find on the internet, which I don't think would add any value. In terms of recruitment, I would say I would build it into the recruitment process. I think any kind of psychometric assessment, I would say don't use the psychometric assessment to make the decision. Use the psychometric to improve the questions you ask and to improve the actual recruitment process. So don't recruit people based on a test that's done, but build into your recruitment process maybe a test, but also the questions that you ask people. If it's a management position, I would want to try and understand what kind of style and approach they use. So I think trying to be creative in the recruitment process so that you can get the best picture possible of the skills and abilities and their competencies, but also their emotional intelligence. And then you can make a decision based on all of that information. In terms of the other point, Zandra, about should all managers take an emotional intelligence test, I guess it would be very useful, but then what would you do if a director goes lowly? I've met lots of very senior people, middle managers, senior managers, who I would expect would score really, really lowly on an emotional intelligence test. It doesn't mean they don't get things done, but I think if you start to look at organizational staff turnover and how happy the team might be, particularly in the dissonant styles, you might see that they're quite low. But we do see those dissonant styles. You do recognize those in a lot of leaders, particularly in the past, who have been very driven. I think that, you can look at people like Donald Trump, whatever your politics are, you can see the disruption that he caused even outside of his own team.
Definitely. It's like you said, it doesn't matter which, if you're a Democrat, if you're pro-Trump or against Trump, it doesn't matter. You can tell he has a direct style and he made an impact, good or bad. That's on everyone's, on your own people's opinion. Last one, because actually we already ran out of time, but I think this one is quite interesting. Do you find that people that you have worked with and that have improved their emotional intelligence in the workplace have also mentioned improvements in their personal life as a result? So if emotional intelligence applied at work has an impact on the personal side? And this is the last
one. No, that's okay. I think that yes, I think because the skills that you use and develop in work, that you develop through your career, if you develop emotional intelligence, you don't switch it off when you leave the workplace. So I think that from my own personal point of view, it's certainly made a difference with me. Maybe I don't know whether that's also because I've got a bit older and you do start to think
and wiser.
more. I didn't want to say that.
You
but you can't just switch it off. And certainly some of the people I work with, particularly on a one-to-one basis, because I'll work with lots of different things, not just emotional intelligence, but you can see that, you know, people do definitely start to, you see the changes happening in their life as well, particularly when they give me that feedback. So I'd say, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you interiorize, of course, and that you start, I guess it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
And we're working 8 hours, 10, 12 hours, depending now. And at the end of the day, it's like you come back home and you are a completely different person. For sure, there are
Yeah.
certain things you can take with you, especially the
Yeah.
positive, good ones that you see have a good impact in the workplace.
Yeah.
We have more questions, but I'm sorry we have run out of time. I know there are some questions and some advice you want from Andy. So actually, now that Andy has minimized himself, we can see his email address. So feel free to reach out to him. Or if you wanted to reach out to us at Hosco, you can do so by emailing us at contact@hosco.com. Thank you so much for your time, for your questions, and see you next time in another Hospitality Talks. Have an amazing day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.